Hey everyone, my name's Sean Wiggins. I'm a mathematics instructor at City College of San Francisco and a data coordinator, data science coordinator. And through that coordinator position, I've been hosting a few talks with people working in a data-related field. And today we have James Wilson, who is at the University of San Francisco, and is going to be speaking about data science and the connection to uh, mental health, social sciences, and other related topics. James, you want to take it away?
Great. Great. Thank you so much, Sean, for having me, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm excited. I'm excited to give the talk. I know it'll be a bit short, but I hope that you get some idea of what it is that I'm up to, and the kind of exciting things you can do with data science and applications, particularly of the brain. So as Sean said, I'm at the University of San Francisco. I'm in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics there. Under the Department of Mathematics and Statistics is actually part of that is the data science program. And so I've been director in the past of the data science program there. And also there's a master's program in data science as well. So I know here with us also is Erica Delgado, who will be speaking about this after the fact. So please stick around. All right. So a little bit about me. I think it's always useful for data science to know kind of where people are coming from. So I am in the Department of Mathematics and Statistics. That's true. And you may ask yourself kind of where does data science lie? And I really think it's an intersection. And I think your program is very similar in looking at it this way of kind of mathematics, statistics, and computer science, right? And so I come from more of the statistical background. So my PhD was from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And so here I write Go Heels. So for all of those that are Tar Heels fan, all right. And I'm now an associate professor of statistics and data science at USF. I've been there since 2015. So I'm going to talk about, though, so I teach many, many classes at USF. I think there's 12 classes I've taught total, or I've prepped before in statistics and data science. And I could talk as much as you'd like to know about those kinds of classes. What I'm going to focus on actually, though, is some of my research interests and things that I work on in my own research time. And so there's a lot of things that I think about, and I think they're all in the spirit of data science. And really, the one I'm going to focus on today with just a few examples is actually looking at kind of network modeling and analysis of brain imaging. So I've thought about a lot of different applications, in particular to aging, Alzheimer's disease, schizophrenia, depression, and then the one I'm going to really focus on is actually social political behavior today. And it's just that I would say is my main area that I'm interested in these days. So that's what I will share with you today. Beyond that, I also think about kind of dynamics of time varying networks. So my background is really in social networks and thinking about graph-based data. And then finally, interpretable machine learning. So how can we make sure that everything that we talk about with machine learning in general is something interpretable? And I think Sean would probably agree with me here. Really, it's been thought about for a long time under the hood of statistics. So how can we go about actually putting some statistical principles behind some of the methods that come out so rapidly these days that are hard to understand sometimes? So my first question is really, with this image, what can scientists do with brain imaging? And I think this is a really cool image. One, because it shows three different, forms of looking at the brain, or three different ways of looking at the brain. On the left-hand side is what's called Pittsburgh compound B. So they're taking a PET, or positron emission tomography image after Pittsburgh compound B has been given to the individual, and watching how that travels through the brain. So basically how this kind of shows up in imaging. In the center is a structural MRI, where we get an understanding of white matter and gray matter. And then on the right is another PET image, which is AV1451. And each of these, so does anybody have any idea, and I'm happy if you'd like to speak up, does anybody have any idea of what these two compounds are possibly checking for?
Is it possibly a response to something?
It is a response, indeed. And in fact, so the Pittsburgh compound B and AV1451 in particular show accumulation of different proteins in the brain. And in particular, these are specifically used to determine whether or not someone has Alzheimer's disease. So very specifically, there are cutoffs for each one of these chemicals that we see on the left and the right. And if you reach an accumulation, a certain amount of PIB or AV1451, then you are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And so this is a really interesting and very reliable way of using brain information, of using scans from the brain to actually diagnose an aging disorder, so our Alzheimer's disease. And so there's a lot to think about here, though. And so I'm interested in these kinds of images and what exactly you can say about it early on using data science. How can we help in this area? And so some other interesting examples and some things I've worked on recently include looking at data like fMRI, so functional magnetic resonance with late life depression. And these are all actually papers that are that have been published recently that I've been working on. And so for late life depression, one thing that I recognized that I think was quite useful for understanding for future diagnoses and future understanding of late life depression is that actually, whether or not you're a male or a female matters, right? So sex matters here. And indeed, the brain changes differently depending on kind of response to a medication and to pharmacological treatment. And so this was incredibly interesting and something that is data driven, right? I mean, to really see these differences, you can see it right away when you start to kind of look at functional connectivity matrices of the data. Other studies I've been working on, psychosis and sleep. So how kind of your brain changes in certain representations and EEG whenever, at different stages of psychosis. And similarly with MRI and fMRI, using different aspects of parts of the brain. So understanding where it is that MRI and fMRI are changing and how that relates to different stages of schizophrenia. So all of these are incredibly interesting, but I wanted to throw at you actually, from stepping back now, something that is more along the lines of behavior rather than of thinking about aging disorders or some form of mental differences. And so here, I want to point out, and I think it's a great example of some of the research that I've been working on lately to show that really data science research is interdisciplinary. And so that from your classes, from what you're learning, that you have to work in teams. You've got to work with other people of many different backgrounds like computer science, mathematics, statistics, and so on. But even in research, it's the same way. And so I mention this because I worked with, here, I'm the statistician, the second one, but I like to think about it as a computational social scientist. That's the one on the left, a statistician, a political scientist, and an fMRI physicist walk into a bar, and they decide to explore associations of brain function with political behavior. Really cool analyses that we ended up working on, but definitely not something that would have come about without the interdisciplinary nature of folks who are working on this. So it's just important to keep that in mind. Pretty much at all levels of data science, I feel that, it really relies on a team. And so this is actually the study I'm going to talk about a little bit, just to show you, for those that are at whatever level it is you're at in learning with data science, just to show you how some very, seemingly challenging questions can be answered with not too difficult of data science, techniques. And so the brain in politics. So as I point out, here, it's not a big stretch to imagine that there's some relationship between brain imaging and political behavior. As I was pointing out, the other studies of thinking about psychosis and aging and Alzheimer's. So why wouldn't it be that, there's a relationship between the brain and behavior? And there has been a lot of research in that. But what was very interesting about this was, we were one of the first, and by the way, this was a big deal to me, not something I've ever had before. So I had to put it up just to say, this study was actually for 2 seconds on NBC Nightly News. So there it is. There's the paper. but they put this in the middle of a bigger story about what AI and data science can do. Oh, thank you, Sean. So I was very excited about that. And I got the email. I was like, wait, what? Oh, awesome. But the point being, we want to use data from the brain. So in this case, functional magnetic resonance, or fMRI. And in this case, what's happening is a person is put under a machine like what you see here, and asked to either stay at rest or to perform some task. Okay. And you can imagine a task might be, they have a button in their hand and they say, hey, anytime you see a star come in front of you, an image come in front of you, press the button, right? And it's usually much more, slightly more complicated than that. But the idea being, it's a task where you're looking up and observing a screen and trying to either click a button or react in some way to the screen that's in front of you. And so what's taken while you're under this machine is actually what's called blood oxygen level dependence. So bold measurements taken over time. And these measurements are taken not just over time, but also over your brain. So there's, as you can see, this machine is going all the way around your body. And so it's basically rotating to take images of different segments of your brain during the entire time that you're under the machine. And what you end up with is an incredibly noisy and incredibly high dimensional data set. So you can imagine, so if we just look at one over here on the left-hand side, so at any given, it's actually a nanoseconds, we have what we break up into kind of a cube that represents your brain. And within that massive cube are little smaller granular, what we call voxels, much like pixels in a television, that represent that given region of your brain. And so we get often up to 1 million of those recordings per nanosecond. And we see that over time. So the idea is you have this incredibly high dimensional data set that's changing through time, depending on either how you change while you're resting, how your brain function is changing while you're resting, or, how you respond to different stimuli or different screens that are in front of you while under the machine. So just to start with, one thing I want to point out is there is an incredible amount of pre-processing that has to happen to this data up front. So even if you're thinking like, oh, how do we even get to the point of doing research on this kind of data set? It's the best point you could make, because of the idea that basically we've got to start from this really noisy data set and bring it to somewhere where we can actually start to say something, right? And so there's a lot of analyses undergoing there. And one form of data analyses, which is really what I've studied and worked on as a PhD student until now, has been thinking about network models. And so the basic idea here is, going from left to right, imagining that you have kind of fMRI snapshots that you're seeing at a given time interval. And that leads to a large multivariate time series, which you see in the middle, where each one of these time series now are representing a different region in your brain. And from that, we create what's called a functional network. So we can imagine taking all the relationships between different regions over time and saying, I'm going to state that two different regions in the brain are connected if they were highly related to one another over time. And that's the idea of representing these kinds of data with functional connectivity matrices or functional connectivity networks. So in this case, to give you the example, and there's a lot more to be read about it if you're interested. But the basic idea was, can we use these functional connectivity matrices and networks to say anything about survey-based data? So each person in this study underwent 9 different tasks, fMRI tests. So they did rest in addition to 8 different functional connectivity, or 8 different fMRI tasks. And in doing so, the data was recorded. We came up with functional connectivity networks through pre-processing and then creating a network for each one. And along with that, we had survey-based data for each person where they filled out, a questionnaire stating basically how liberal or how conservative do you feel that you are. So this was a Likert scale. And then there were more questions. So other questions such as how liberal or how conservative do you feel where you grew up was? How liberal or conservative do you see your mom? Do you see your dad? Annual income, other SES, so socioeconomic indicators as well. And so there were many, many, many different pieces of information that we got from a survey in addition to this brain data, right? This imaging data. So we wanted to kind of link the two and say, well, can we say anything about, the survey responses using networks and data science? The other, another big question was which tasks are most suitable for predicting ideology. So can we actually use some of these tasks to say something about ideology, and then which brain regions contribute? And so in recognizing that time is short, I'm going to at least give you an idea. So I described that of how we went about doing this. And then any other questions you may have, I'm happy to answer. But I at least wanted to talk through some analyses to kind of give you an idea of where data science comes in. And so once we get a network, the basic idea was to use something like a classification method. And in this case, we use something that sounds fancy, but it's really not that fancy. It's a convolutional neural network, which you may or may not have worked with in so far, but it's something that you'll reach and get to learn about. And the basic idea was to train this on the network to say something about different survey-based responses, right? So we're just trying to model the relationship between a brain, which is this very complex high-dimensional system, and a response, which is a very simple 1 through 6 Likert scale. And this kind of framework allows us to do it. And there are other ways of doing it as well. And furthermore, to kind of understand, do these functional connectivity networks tell us anything more or as much as other survey-based responses? And so to go through it somewhat in an overview, our first analysis was to understand to what extent functional connectivity could actually predict political ideology. And so this is a prediction problem. And taking, understanding the prediction ability of a given system is a well understood idea in data science, and there's many different methods and many different models that you could try to start making predictions. But using these features that we get from the convolutional neural network, we're actually able to do something in relating these features with the true ideology. And beyond that, we actually use things like principal component analysis. So whenever you reach the point of learning principal component analysis, just know it actually is an incredibly valuable tool and is still used all the time. So I'm trying to stand up for you there, Sean. There you go. And in fact, that's what we did. We wanted to understand, well, how much information are these features giving us? We can run this fancy prediction method up front, but then PCA can actually tell us what it's giving us, right? Or give us some information behind that. And then we could use things like logistic regression models. We use boosted logistic regression models, but the basic idea is still logistic regression, right? So kind of 3 basic ideas in data science: associations, so understanding correlations and relationships between one data measurement and another. Trying to cluster and do some form of unsupervised learning where you explore the data and understand how much information is it giving you. We could use PCA. And then prediction, there's a gamut of methods, but in the statistics literature and in understanding kind of interpretability, logistic regression is really the way to go. Second question, again, what off-the-shelf tasks? So these tasks that we looked at are actually closely associated with ideology. And we use things like logistic regression and regularization, which is a nice kind of addition to looking at these standard regression models, and ordinary least squares. So for those that have looked at linear regression, we use very simple models here. Once we have the features and have done the work up front, the methods aren't too challenging after the fact. I'll skip past this for the moment. Some of this was trying to understand, what are the actual relationships. But what I want to say, I'll get to the third analysis and then I'll kind of give you an overview of what we found. But the third analysis is really what brain regions, so now getting more granular, are actually associated with ideology. And so in that, we were able to use kind of a reverse engineering based method sometimes called deconvolutional neural networks, that shows us the contribution of each one of the brain regions to the prediction model for ideology. And now I'm going to go past that, but show you give you an understanding of the types of visuals you may see. Don't worry if this makes no sense to you at all. I'll admit also I am not a neuroscientist by any means, so it means only a little to me. But the basic idea is this: visualization with things like heat maps can be incredibly useful. An understanding, in this case, what we're trying to get at is for different tasks like reward, retrieval, and empathy. Those were 3 of the 9 tasks that we looked at. What regions of the brain are actually giving us the most predictive power of how conservative or how liberal you are? And so in that, these values mean something, and we can really start to investigate. And for those that are neuroscientists or, brain, look at different regions of the brain and focus on these areas, they can then start to understand, okay, let me now think about the biology and the mechanisms behind this. So again, the interdisciplinary nature of the research. And so with all of that, I wouldn't, well, I'll say 2 things. I am presenting something where we actually came up with, we actually found some interesting results. Having said that, I think it's always important to know, and I always teach this in my classes as well, that just because you have an interesting data set and an interesting problem does not mean you're going to find anything, right? That you'll find associations or that you'll be able to predict anything. But that's still the art of learning, right? So we're learning something in doing so. So there's a lot of reward still in doing that, despite not finding what you hoped would be true. Right here, we actually did find something. So I just wanted to say, in general, we were actually able to predict ideology quite well, and it did better than what we expected based on the survey-based responses. And we were able to then also talk more about brain regions that were associated with ideology. So that's just an example of of an application. There are many, many more. I hope you found it interesting. I wanted to at least point out, if you're interested, some of the other things I'll point out as a burgeoning data science scientist. So as you kind of go into data science and think about this, I think it's incredibly useful to have your software be public. So any kind of coding, any kind of programming that you work on, or statistical analyses, or data analyses, is really useful to make that either public or make it to where it's reproducible. So I always do that. I use GitHub to do that. And so I show my GitHub site, and you're welcome to visit that. But also, if you have any questions or just want to talk more about data science or life in at USF in general, please feel free to ask me any questions you want to. So you got my email and my Twitter as well. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much, James. That was really insightful. We're gonna transition to a short Q&A session. So don't be overwhelmed. Several people attending are in my Math 108 class, and there's extra credit involved with question asking. So there might be a slew of questions.
Okay, great.
Feel free to look through the chat, James, and as the questions kind of come in, and respond to the ones you want to. After about 10-ish minutes, we might switch over to Erica talking a little bit about USF and some of your data programs over there.
Perfect. That sounds great. So yeah, I'll go by these one by one. So first, hello everybody, and thank you for posting questions or just making nice statements. I appreciate that. Jessica, thank you. I appreciate that. So Shiwa, let's see. How do you tease out the confounding factors to ask the right questions to a conservative or a liberal to control that the difference in fMRI is due to ideology differences? That is a great question. Thank you for asking that. So the original study was actually not based on political ideology whatsoever. And in fact, it was what's called the Well-Being Project. It came from the Ohio State University. So some of my collaborators are at Ohio State. And they collected the data actually to try to understand kind of the normative or healthy brain. So, it's hard to say what exactly means healthy brain, but the point being, they tried to look at around 200 different individuals who had no reported symptoms or any kind of disruptions in brain function. And so with that, the tasks then for the healthy cohort were off the shelf in the sense that they're incredibly common tasks that are run in fMRI studies. So, it was a very kind of, okay, we have healthy individuals, we have very classic like tasks that really aren't there to elicit, political ideology. And then, we took that and said, well, what can we learn based on this? So it wasn't designed in the way to say, like, let's tease out political ideology. But what I would say is, our associations, predictive ability are really what the key points are here. But thank you. It's a great question. How does priming play into this? So as far as I can tell, there was no priming in this sense. The people were recruited not based on political ideology, but rather, generally speaking, they were either students at Ohio State or folks that were roughly, anywhere between 5 and 15 years older than students that were at Ohio State. They were given a survey filled with many, many questions beyond just political ideology. So in my opinion, there's not a priming issue, but it's something that could be investigated. How long did this research take? So functional connectivity and fMRI data takes a while to clean and bring to a stage that can actually be analyzed. And I'll say I was not on that front of cleaning and pre-processing the data. The actual collection of data, I believe, was over 1.5 years. The pre-processing of the data, there's people have pipelines and people have ways of doing this to where they actually worked on getting that done relatively quickly. As far as our analyses, that was another roughly about 1.5 years. And I'd like to say that could have been faster, but at the same time, there was a lot of exploratory analysis going on. And if I could point anything out as far as data science research and data science in general, even if you're at a tech company or wherever you may be, exploratory analysis is a major part of it. So, kind of getting through and understanding and starting to see the patterns and understanding the data is one of the most important parts of the analysis. So it took about 1.5 years to publication. How do you extract data from the brain? So that was all coming from fMRI. And in that, we had a time series of which we made a network. Understanding regions, this was all based on kind of pre-processing and relating the different regions to anatomical regions as well. All right, so Mary, let me look at your question. Given your expertise in the modeling and analysis of complex network data with applications to social, can you share your insights on the latest developments and trends in this field and how they may impact future career opportunities for students interested in statistics and data science? Great question, Mary. Thank you. So with network analysis, this is very fascinating. So I went in, I studied networks actually for my master's degree, which I did at Clemson University before heading to University of North Carolina for my PhD. And I studied networks the entire time. Mostly because, well, my initial entry to this was the fact that I felt that the visualizations themselves could help us out a long way of understanding the data set, of understanding the data. And I was mostly, when I started, interested in kind of social networks and understanding things like Facebook, because Facebook started when I was a junior in high school, if I remember right. And so with all of this, the visualization and the kind of unique way that networks play a role, I think are incredibly interesting. And what I would say for future opportunities, what I've found over and over and over again, especially in the Masters of Data Science program at USF, is the fact that networks tend to offer a potential analyses that are often overlooked. So, statistical analyses, standard kind of multivariate data analysis, regressions, and things that you think about are kind of the go-to, and then thinking about predictive models, and there's a lot of kind of fancy machine learning methods. But a lot of times, a network perspective, I'll look at it as a network model, actually offers a lot of insights into the data itself. So in terms of kind of future career opportunities, I think that you can actually add a lot. And I've seen this at many different companies. You can add a lot to what they're investigating because not so many people are regularly using network analysis to the extent to where you can actually really give a lot to the company or the place that you're working. That's my take on it. And I've seen that over the years working with folks. So let's see. I want to make sure also that Erica has plenty of time. So I will perhaps answer these a little bit faster. The body keeps the score. I never really realized most of the things are really connected to data science. Thank you, Marielle. What is an efficient way to organize the data and how to define the priority of data? Organizing data is certainly a large component of this. Keeping it in a place that's in a nice format. What I'll say is that neuroscientists and brain imagers have been working on this for a while. I'm not saying I love it. That's another thing you'll find is when you're in interdisciplinary fields, you often will be like, why wasn't this organized this way? Like this thing that I know that makes a lot of sense, like in SQL or, in databases or something along these lines. But neuroimagers have designed a way to which they kind of maintain data. And that was really helpful. So you've kind of got to learn the system that way to be able to access and work with the data. What other topics do I research using data science? All sorts. I will say in terms of research, I really do like to find new applications and think about where data science and network analysis and things like this really do apply. A lot of where I'm trying to go these days is actually thinking about climate and where data science can be used in climate, either prediction and really just try to figure out the biggest problems in climate. I mean, we all understand kind of some of the issues, but where it is exactly that a data scientist can help here. So that's really what I'm thinking about currently. I've looked a lot at kind of political landscapes and kind of division of Congress and things along these lines in the past, and social networks with, looking at Twitter and Facebook, many different things, I'd say. How do you know that any statistically significant findings weren't simply due to chance? I will say, great question, Margaret, about how do I know they're not just due to chance? Indeed, this was with statistical inference and thinking about multiple comparisons and really handling this in a way to where we could be fairly certain about our findings. I'm happy to talk about that more. There's a lot more to that, but what I would say is that yes, that was taken into consideration. Are there any particular visual metaphors or ways of thinking of data you like to use when looking at a new problem? That's a great question. I would say, I start to think about questions. Yeah, it's interesting. The more experience you get, the more, working with different applications and areas, the more kind of fun you have at designing a way of trying to get at the problem. What I've learned is working with others, especially in interdisciplinary science, it often takes a little while to figure out exactly what it is that the people you're working with want. And translating that to analyses is a real, is a real challenge in and of itself, or it can be. So just keep that in mind whenever you start working with others on a project. It's going to very often be the fact that they're not entirely clear on how what they want to find. They may say, well, here's my problem. How do I solve that? And then you have to break it down into a data analytic problem. So for me, it's really trying to break it down into different segments of data science, like prediction, association, exploratory analysis, right? And where to start. Like, where do we start? I always start with exploratory analysis of some sort. Will clustering and visualization answer the question? If not, is there a model or a regression of some sort that can work? Do we need something fancier? Is there a need for prediction, right? So it really kind of breaking it down into one of those three categories, or the combination of it, is the most, to me, is a really good way to proceed. Follow-up question. Great. Thank you, Mary. Ideally follow up. So, and then I'll end with this question, because I know I'm a little bit over, so I apologize for that, Erica, and passing it on to you. The follow-up question: should we think of this study more as exploratory and ideally follow up with a study targeted towards liberals and conservatives specifically? My answer to that, Margaret, would be yes. I would indeed advocate for that. The way that this was designed, with fMRI, it's often the case that, especially when you're looking at things like Alzheimer's disease, or if you're looking at things like schizophrenia, psychosis, and other mental illness, it is designed specifically to answer a question about that given disease. Here with behavior, in political behavior or ideology, I believe that a similar experiment should be set up to where, the design is to tease out differences between folks of different spectrum on the political spectrum. And that would really be the only way that we could answer these questions of causality. So yes, there's a lot more to say there, but I think that would be really fascinating. And yes, thank you for sharing that, Sean. That's right. So there's another presentation that I have as well. So thank you again, everyone. I wanted to hand it off now. So let me stop sharing. I really appreciate your questions and your attention. That was really a lot of fun. So I want to pass it on to Erica Delgado now, who's also at USF, and she'll talk a little bit about transfer and the programs and everything of how to get in with USF and kind of the relationship we have with CCSF. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, James. That was very fascinating, by the way. As someone who is not a data scientist, that was really interesting stuff.
Thank you.
So yeah, my name, oh, sorry. My thing's going haywire here. Oh, let me try that again. Sorry, y'all. All right, hopefully everyone can see my screen okay. So yeah, my name is Erica Delgado. I am the Director of Transfer Admission at University of San Francisco. So just here to talk to you a little bit about USF, sort of the programs that we offer, some of the transfer pathways, general admission requirements, and then of course answer any questions that you may have. So I know we're located here in San Francisco, but surprisingly, sometimes I do often get questions from students who live in San Francisco, wondering where USF is exactly in the city. Maybe it's not something a university they'd really thought about, because we are sort of the smaller university in the Bay Area. So just a little bit about kind of who we are overall. So we are a mid-size urban-based mission-driven institution. So we have about 6,000 undergrad students and about 3,000 master's degree students. So total enrollment of about 10,000 students spread between, master's, bachelor's, and even higher programs. And then the other, as I said, is, we are urban-based. We're located right in the middle of the city. If you aren't familiar with us, we are just a few blocks away from Golden Gate Park, sort of smushed between the Presidio and the Golden Gate in the Inner Richmond district of San Francisco. Because we are sort of a mid-size institution, there's a lot of benefits. One is our class sizes are a little smaller. So average class size you're going to get at University of San Francisco is 23. And we do have a 13-to-1 student to faculty ratio. So when you talk a little bit about learning environments and maybe for students, what sort of learning environment you think you can be the most successful in, definitely for some students, that sort of smaller, more discussion-driven environment may be a learning environment that's a little bit more suitable for you compared to maybe a 300-person lecture hall. So that's something that we definitely like to sort of use to differentiate ourselves. The other thing I mentioned too is that we're mission driven. So you'll see a little bit in every undergrad program that we offer that there's a little bit of a community engagement component, a little bit of social justice and everything, a little bit of sort of how can we improve the world, whether it's in through the research that we're doing, through our nursing programs. There's just a little bit of always questioning sort of the world around us and how we can make it a better place. One of the things we like to talk about as well is that we are the most ethnically diverse university in the United States. We were number 2 last year, but we're actually up to number 1. So we are incredibly diverse, just as diverse, if not more so, than the city of San Francisco itself. So lots of different perspectives of different students that we have on our campus. And then we are situated on a 55-acre campus. So just like our population, it's basically considered sort of a mid-size university. So as I mentioned as well, sometimes students are curious where we're located. So this is us here, located right there in the middle of San Francisco, just 3 miles away from the ocean and 3 miles away from the financial district. So a little bit about the programs that we offer. So our academics were divided into 5 different schools. So our College of Arts and Sciences, Nursing, Management, Education, and Law. Specifically in terms of maybe what programs could be of interest to someone who's maybe thinking they might go into a data science role. What I think you learned from the previous speaker is that there's, of course, data in everything and all different sort of careers, like even for me in admissions, looking at student trends and things like that. So definitely, you're going to find some applications for that regardless of what fields you go into. But sort of the ones that came to my mind as someone, as I mentioned, is not a data scientist. We do have a data science Bachelor of Science program. We do have a Bachelor of Science in Economics, and there are some interesting concentrations here. As well as you'll notice we have dual degree programs. So these are pretty neat in that you're actually able to start working on your master's degree. Sometimes as soon as your junior or senior year. So you're starting to do some of that coursework, and then you're only adding 1 additional year onto your program in order to get both your bachelor's degree and your master's degree. So these are some pretty unique opportunities that students have. And we do have a few of those within our Bachelor of Science in Economics. And econ is actually a STEM major for us, which is also a little bit unique as well. So same thing with business analytics. That is a STEM designated program as well. We also have a 4+1 in computer science. We've got finance. I wrote mathematics there. And then, of course, there are many, many other programs that you may find interesting if you're into data science. So just a few words on the transfer admission process, just to kind of give you a sense of sort of how it works. And I should mention, usually this presentation, if you come to campus, it's about an hour long. So I'm definitely trying to pare down some of this information. But if you have any questions about the transfer process, you can always schedule appointments with our admission advisors. We do credit evaluations and all of that. But just to kind of give you a sense of how your credits may transfer, if you're curious about what that looks like for us. So all degrees are, oops, sorry about that. My mouse is going a little haywire here. All degrees are 128 units in order to graduate. So we will take an unlimited amount of credits from your community college. So as many credits as you've taken, we will transfer over to USF. You just have to complete at least 44 credits and 16 within your major. And then, of course, meet all the requirements for your degree. But oftentimes institutions will sort of cap off how many units you can bring over. And for us, you can actually bring over an unlimited amount, which is also a bit unique. And if you're taking any courses to transfer to a UC or a CSU, all of those courses transfer as well, with just a few exceptions. And that would be like any remedial courses or very technical courses in nature as well. So one thing I wanted to point out as well, something we have on our website is our, they're called articulation agreements. And I'm just going to I'm going to put the link in the chat, and then I will also just share my screen on that as well. So this is basically on our website, and it sort of shows students who want to know how their credits transfer. They can actually come here and look up the courses that they've taken and see how they fit into our core curriculum. So oftentimes students spend the 2 years at a community college, maybe focused on the general education classes, but also some of the core classes that they need for the major. And this website here sort of helps you, one, understand what our core curriculum is, but also what courses you can take at CCSF that are going to fulfill those requirements. Not every course is listed here. So for any student who's sort of curious and wants to explore, just know that if you don't see your course listed here, like I looked during the presentation to see if the Math 108 class was here, it's not listed. Doesn't mean it doesn't transfer. We absolutely take that course, and it does fulfill a core curriculum class, or I'm sorry, a major core class for our data science program. So if it's not here, it just means that we just haven't added it here. And in that case, we're happy to sort of let you know how that transfers. But this is just to give you a sense of what our core curriculum is, what are some options that are offered at CCSF where you can slowly start to work on some of those core curriculum classes before you transfer over. And those are all listed here. So I will also link that in the chat so that you can sort of look later if you're curious on sort of where things stand. But as I mentioned as well, we also do credit evaluation. So if you want to see where you are at with your core curriculum, that's something that all of our admission counselors are happy to do as well. Quick word on what we require to transfer. So we have pretty open requirements. So for students who are maybe thinking about UC or CSU, this is going to be quite different from those requirements. So you actually only need 24 semester units and a 2.5 GPA. Those are our only, sorry about that. Those are our only main requirements. So you don't have to have all the general education done, all the lower division core classes done, 60 units, any of that. It's really just 24 units and a 2.5 GPA. Of course, the more classes you take at CCSF, the quicker it's going to be for you to graduate once you transfer. You know, it's going to reduce overall costs and things like that. But in terms of admission requirements, we actually don't require that you have even prerequisite courses for your major done, with the exception of engineering. Everything else, we're just looking that you've got those 24 units and that 3.5. And then, of course, certain GPA ranges in order to qualify you for merit scholarship, which I will review here in a second. So these are our different merit scholarships for transfer students. These are not anything that our transfer students need to apply for. It's not like we have a certain amount to give out. Basically, you're automatically considered for all of these transfer scholarships at the time of admission based on your transferable GPA. So actually, they start at 2.9 this year, which qualifies you for 7,000, and they go all the way up to 16,000 based on your transfer GPA. And these are renewable. So as long as you maintain steady academic progress, once you transfer to USF, you'll continue to get your merit scholarship your second year. If you have to go a third year, you would get your merit scholarship then as well. And this is on top of any need-based aid you may qualify for through FAFSA, either a Cal Grant, Pell Grant. And then we also have USF specific need-based aid that we're able to give students as well based on their expected family contribution from their FAFSA. So lots of additional aid directly from the institution on top of what you may be getting through your regular FAFSA process. So this QR code, those QR codes there sort of give you more. Look at the little one. Sorry, got distracted by the baby.
He was calling me. Sorry.
So here are the QR codes for the different applications and the different sort of timelines. So I won't go too much into that, but just know we do admit in spring and fall. The deadlines are November 1st and March 1st. So you can apply for either one of those. We do rolling admission, so we release admission decisions every single week. So we aren't waiting for those deadlines in order to make admission decisions. And all you need to apply is your application. Oh my gosh. Your application as well as your transcripts as well. And they can be unofficial at the time of admission. So that's all we require for admission. That's sort of an overall view. As I mentioned, I will put that link in the chat for the articulation agreements if you want to see how things transfer. This QR code takes you to actually schedule an appointment with an admission counselor if you have any other specific questions or you want us to do an evaluation of your units. That QR code goes there as well. And then we do host daily tours on our campus Monday through Saturday. So if you've never been on campus, you want to take a tour, we do host those every day as well. And that's it for me. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't know if any came through, but I know we don't have too much time, but I'm happy to answer any.
Cool. Thank you so much. Yeah, does anyone have any questions for Erica? Okay, cool. And then just any last minute questions for James? James and the little one.
He's I'm getting him to answer questions early, so no.
Well, thank you everyone for being here. Thanks for making this event possible. And I hope you all have a good day. The recording will be on the CCSF Math website on the homepage, and I'll post that shortly. All right, take care, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks,
Yeah.
Sean.